Namaste. Welcome to Indic today. We welcome Swami Medhananda. We will be having a video interaction with Swamiji, which will be followed by our web interview. We can see there are two parts of religion. One part of religion is sadhana, and another part of religion is philosophy. So somewhere Swamiji will be talking about how is he giving scholars practitioner view on the religious philosophy. So I will read out Swami Medhananda's CV. He is a very dynamic and young monk of Ramakrishna mission. Currently, Swami Medhananda is a senior research fellow in philosophy at the Ramakrishna Institute of Moral and Spiritual Education in Mysore. He is the recipient of several fellowships across the world. Swamiji has finished his PhD from University of California, Berkeley in German aesthetics. His first book, Dialectics of Aesthetic Agency, was published by Bloomsbury in 2013. Swamiji is an expert in Vedanta philosophy, scriptural hermeneutics, Ramakrishna Vivekananda thought, and philosophy of Sri Aurobindo. His second book on Ramakrishna's philosophy was published by the Oxford University Press in 2018. The book was very well received across academia and also in Ramakrishna Vivekananda circles. Swamiji is also the editor of the Bloomsbury Research Handbook of Vedanta. It was published in 2020 and scholars across the world have contributed to it. Swamiji's upcoming book, Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism, would be published by the Oxford University Press in 2022. So as I introduce him, the first question that naturally comes to my mind, and I'm sure that would come to readers' mind as well, that what made Swamiji join the mission after being born and brought up in USA? Over to you, Swamiji.
Thank you. So I was born and raised in Boston, Massachusetts. My parents, of course, were Bengali Hindus, but they were not devotees. They didn't introduce me to the life and teachings of Sri Ramakrishna or Swami Vivekananda. I came to them on my own, fairly late in my life. So when I was 19, I was an undergraduate student in California, and I read the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, for the first time. But I didn't know Sanskrit at the time, so I read it in Sri Aurobindo's English translation. And that, I don't know, that was one of the earliest things I can remember when I was really kind of, I felt sort of moved to eventually become a monk. I just had this idea that I wanted to renounce ordinary worldly aims and values for the sake of a higher goal. And at the same time, roughly, I had the sense that if I was to be a monk, I should be a monk in India because of the rich spiritual heritage in India. And because I was born and raised in the West and in the US in particular, everything is so, it's a very affluent country, right? So you're surrounded by wealth and materialism. And I thought that India would be a more conducive environment for my spiritual pursuits. And then I started my PhD at Berkeley. And within one semester, more or less, I had told my professors that I would finish my PhD and then move to India and be a monk. And nobody believed me at the time. But I just had this idea. And I was quite convinced about it. And that was, I had decided to become a monk before I had known anything about Sri Ramakrishna or Swami Vivekananda. But during my PhD, I read Swami Vivekananda's Raja Yoga. And I believe I also read, at about that time, the Gospel of Sri Ramakrishna. And I liked Swami Vivekananda's book so much that I ordered the entire 9-volume complete works from the Kolkata Advaita Ashrama. And I read the whole thing, the 9 volumes, very quickly, probably within a year or so, during my PhD. And then after finishing my PhD in 2009, my parents were living in Southern California at the time, near Hollywood. So I spent some time with them, and I purchased a one-way ticket to India to become a monk. So I told my parents, and then I found out that a very senior monk of the order was the head of the Hollywood ashrama. His name is Swami Swahananda, who was a disciple of Swami Vijnananda, who was a direct disciple of Ramakrishna. And I just looked at the Hollywood Ashrama website and I thought, before I go to India, I should pay my respects and just meet this senior Swami. So I went to the Hollywood Ashrama in 2009 summer. And I did pranams to him when I met him. We talked very briefly. He asked me a little bit about what I was doing. And I told him I wanted to be a monk. And I told him I was going to move to India soon to become a sannyasi. And then he said, let me give you Diksha. He offered to give me Diksha, which means mantra initiation. And at first I was a bit reluctant actually, because my plan was to get Diksha in Veluma in India. And then he made a strong case. He said, you'll find that if you get Diksha from me, it'll be one-on-one. It'll be in my room. There won't be any other devotees or other people getting initiated at the same time. It'll be a more personal experience. And that finally persuaded me. And I feel blessed that I was given Diksha on my birthday. He arranged to give it to me on my birthday. And within a month, I came to India, and then I joined the order in Velumat at Vivekananda University in 2010. And I was there for 11 years, and I just recently moved here to Mysore to continue my academic work. And one thing that I feel really grateful about is that because my academic background is in philosophy, I'm able to relate my academic work to my spiritual life in a really direct way. My academic work is on Sri Ramakrishna and Vivekananda and Vedanta and Sri Aurobindo. And that's not the case with many other monks in the order. Even at Vivekananda University, 98% of the monks have background in some science subject, whether it's physics or computer science or mathematics. And it's not as easy to connect those kinds of subjects to spirituality, right? So that's one thing I feel very grateful about.
And can you tell us about your upbringing, that how much you were familiar with Indian scriptures, or like most of the Indian families, we are brought up maybe talking in mother tongue, then we are reading Sanskrit shlokas and all. That is a part of our upbringing. So how was it in US for you?
Yeah, I spoke Bengali with my parents at home, but we never talked about Hindu scriptures or anything like that. My mother, she would do puja twice a day. And she would read the Gita on her own. She would never talk to me about it. This typical life of a Hindu family in the West is that you'll go to a Hindu temple for certain rituals, like whether it's Annaprashan, which is that first solid food feeding at 6 months, or for marriages, or for this and that, or for like special pujas. But it all felt very mechanical to me, and they never explained the kind of Vedantic significance of any of these things, or the scriptural background. One thing I'll mention though is that I went to Bengali school once a week on Sundays from about age 6 to age 12 or 13. And again, there we didn't discuss anything about Indian religion or spirituality, but I learned Bangla, like how to read and write Bangla, and a little bit about India's history. But in terms of kind of spiritual background, absolutely nil. I was not taught in any way. As I said, I just, from the general academic culture I was in, I had heard about the Bhagavad Gita, and I was also interested in world religion. So I was reading the Bible. I was also reading the Quran. I was reading Dhammapada, and I read Gita, and just to get a kind of broad sense of the different religions. I was doing kind of, you can call it religious shopping or spiritual shopping, because I hadn't settled on my path yet. And so, yeah, I went into spirituality and religion with a very open mind. I hadn't decided in advance what tradition I would follow. And I didn't even think I would necessarily follow a Hindu tradition. I kept everything open, and then I just, now I see it's by God's grace, but I was led in a certain direction.
Right. So we can see that you decided to become a monk when you were pursuing your PhD. So how did your family react to this?
In the typical way that families react, not very well.
Right.
Except one thing about, there's a big difference between Indian families, meaning families in India, and those in the West. In the West, at the age of 18, the child leaves the household and lives in the university that they're studying. And I think in India, often you still live with your parents, and there's much closer ties. But so from the age of 18, I moved across the country from Boston to California, which is, it's 3,000 miles apart. And they've always known that I'm a very independent type of person. I have a sister who's much more sort of obedient. So they were already expecting that I would, do something a bit unusual, and no matter what they would say, they couldn't convince me. If I felt that something was right, I would do that. I wouldn't be persuaded by them. So in light of that, my own knowing my personality, once I told them that I was going to be a monk and that I bought a one-way ticket, I showed them the ticket, and it was a one-way ticket. There was no return flight. Then they understood. I had been warning them for years before that. They didn't believe me. But when I showed them the one-way ticket, then they said, oh boy, this guy's serious. And then they tried to convince me this way and that way, and then finally they just accepted it. Now they're very happy, and in fact, within a few years of my joining the Ramakrishna order, they also became initiated devotees. Their guru is Swami Medhananda, and now they're doing spiritual practices, and they're very happy for me. But they're all, as Indian parents, they're also happy that I was able to do my academic work while also a monk.
Yes.
Yeah, it made it less painful for them, let's say.
Yes.
Because one of their first points was, well, you just did your PhD, you're throwing it all in the garbage. What's the point? It's all a waste. So now I can show them, no, it's not a waste. You can see all the work that I'm doing based on my PhD work. It's, I'm still working on Sri Ramakrishna, Vivekananda, and publishing with good publishers.
So just a last question in this continuation that I wanted to ask, that had you visited India before you joined the mission?
Yeah, many times. From age 2, I would come with my parents to visit relatives every other year of my life. So age 2, age 4, age 6, like that, more or less like that. For about a month at a time in the winter season. That was, we have, in the US, there's about a 1 month vacation in December. So at that time, we would come to India, I visit my relatives in Kolkata and also in Odisha, and Puri. Yeah, so I had a taste of India. And when I was very young, I thought it was very dirty, and
yes,
I would make fun of it. And then once I became a little older, about 18, 19, I started appreciating it much more. And then suddenly it occurred to me, I need to be a monk in India. So the whole thing this is all Sri Ramakrishna's play, I think.
So Sri Ramakrishna brought you here once again, we can say.
Yeah. After a long kind of a detour, you can say, yeah.
Yes, and readers will definitely read elaborately in our web interview. But one question which I would like to ask, which is based on your upcoming book, which is Swami Vivekananda's Vedantic Cosmopolitanism. So maybe scholars may know it. There is a lot of discussion on Indian philosophy, on Vedanta philosophy, on Vivekananda's thought. So can you explain it from the general reader's point of view, this term, Vedantic Cosmopolitanism of Swami Vivekananda, in brief?
Yeah, so the word cosmopolitan, most people know, but they may not know that the etymology of the word, it's a combination of 2 words. Cosmos, which means world, right, or universe, and polis, which means citizen. So a cosmopolitan is somebody who is a citizen, not of any particular country, but of the entire world. So that's the real idea that I was trying to convey with the title, and it's the overarching kind of interpretive approach that I'm adopting throughout the book. The idea is that Swami Vivekananda himself would often insist, I don't just belong to India, I belong to the entire world. And he would say it again and again in another place. Actually, the epigraph to my book is, he originally wrote it in Bengali, but I gave the Bangla and then I also did the English translation. But the English is this: my motto is to learn whatever is great wherever I may find it. So the idea is that as a cosmopolitan, he was looking to learn from all the different countries of the world, all the different cultures, all the different great intellectual traditions. And he didn't care so much about which tradition it was, but more about the value of the ideas. And so throughout my book, I'm arguing that Swami Vivekananda he was a cosmopolitan thinker in the sense that he drew upon both Western and Indian ideas and then fused them and synthesized them in creative and new ways. And my cosmopolitan approach to Vivekananda differs from 2 of the prevailing approaches to Vivekananda's thought. The first being that Swami Vivekananda was more or less a follower of Shankara's Advaita Vedanta. So many scholars claim that he basically taught the same Advaita Vedanta except in a slightly different kind of clothing. And I think that that approach significantly narrows and reduces the importance and the value of his philosophical ideas. And the second approach, which is more adopted by a number of Western scholars, starting with Paul Hacker, is the Neo-Vedantic approach. And these scholars claim that Vivekananda was actually, he was not a follower of Shankara. He was what's called a Neo-Vedantin, which means he taught a new kind of Vedanta philosophy, which was not grounded in any Indian tradition, but was more influenced by Western ideas and Western values. And they often, people who argue that he was a Neo-Vedantin often have some kind of agenda, and they often use it as a kind of criticism. So Paul Hacker, for instance, who was a Catholic theologian himself, he claimed that Vivekananda was passing off what were essentially Western ideas as Indian ones, as his own ideas, in order to promote Hindu nationalism, because at the time, of course, India was under British colonial rule, and this was one way that he was trying to assert the superiority of Indian culture over the culture of their oppressors, of India's oppressors. So anyway, I disagree with both of these fundamental approaches to Vivekananda, and I'm defending this new cosmopolitan approach to Vivekananda's thought. And I should mention that I'm not the first to defend a cosmopolitan approach to Vivekananda. I'll just mention a couple scholars who have defended a similar approach. James Madeo is especially noteworthy. He published an article in 2017 called Rethinking Neo-Vedanta, where that's a very important article for my book, and I cite it in my book. He's one of the first to really argue for a cosmopolitan approach to Vivekananda's thought.
So what is unique about this book is that you are highlighting the background, Vivekananda's scriptural hermeneutics of rereading of Vedanta and how it is rooted in Sri Ramakrishna and very much in Indian tradition. This is what you are arguing, and this is what I think readers will get to understand in the book.
Yeah, at least that's in the first 3 chapters of the book. My book is big, and it has 10 chapters and 4 sections. And so what you just mentioned is the first part of my 4-part book. The first section is called Integral Advaita, and there I argue that Swami Vivekananda is reinterpreting the Vedantic scriptures and reinterpreting Advaita Vedanta in the light of his Guru Sri Ramakrishna's very broad, expansive kind of spiritual philosophy, which I call Vijnana Vedanta in my previous book. That's reality. And then in subsequent sections of my book, I discuss many different issues which are more cross-cultural in nature. So my book has kind of 2 different aims. One is trying to just have a better understanding of what Vivekananda's philosophical views are and how they're based in very creative syntheses of both Western and Indian ideas. And secondly, there's this cross-cultural component. I try to bring Swami Vivekananda's philosophical ideas into dialogue with contemporary Western philosophers and their views on a number of different issues like the nature of faith, the limits of reason, the hard problem of consciousness, and a number of other topics like that.
Definitely, Swamiji. So please, thank you, Swamiji, for this interaction. And we request readers on Indic Today web portal, please read the detailed interview along with it. Yeah, thank you so much.